A dust storm rolls off the lava beds of Northern California like a wall of broken glass. Heat shimmers over black rock that still carries the memory of fire. A broken wagon lies half buried at the edge of Tule Lake. Its wheels sink into sucking mud that smells of rot. Vultures circle low, their wings scraping the dusk. Chains clink against the scorched wood as if the wagon itself were shackled. Eleanor Hart, a widowed settler of 27, is bound in iron for defying Sheriff Malcolm Cray's demand that she remarry him to settle her debts. Her husband's grave is barely a month old. Abandoned by her traveling party and with no kin left to defend her, she faces hunger, exposure, and the sheriff's promise that if she won't be his wife, she'll rot chained to the wagon until she yields. But when a rider emerged at dusk, silhouetted against the burning horizon, the figure who dismounted was no savior. He carried the scars of a Modoc war chief, and in the sheriff's own deposition, buried in county files for 50 years, one erasure reveals why the chains were never logged in the official inventory. What you're about to hear is what that omission concealed. Dust rasped her throat. Eleanor tasted metal and old blood. The storm hissed across the lake, carrying the stink of rotting reeds and dead fish. She tried to lift her hands, but iron bit bone. Each breath sent pain up her arms to her shoulders. The wagon's splintered rail pressed into her spine. The sun sat low, flat as a coin, and the world turned the color of ash. Sheriff Malcolm Cray stood with his hat pulled low and his coat flapping. His face was cut by wind lines and a thin white scar along his jaw. He did not look at her. He looked past her, toward the road, where no help was coming. "You'll want to think on it," he said. "Night out here is a hard tutor." His voice was deep and steady, the voice men obeyed at a gallows tree. Deputy Silas Cray, narrower, restless, kicked the wagon wheel with his boot and grinned. "She'll think clear by morning," he said. "They all do when it gets cold." Father Alaric Dunn stood a few paces back. The priest's hair was gray and thin. He cradled a small leather book to his chest and murmured Latin, as if it could build a wall between him and what he saw. When Eleanor's eyes found him, he looked away. "Pray, child," he said softly. "The Lord sees." "The Lord sees you," she whispered. The wind tore the words. Jonas Pike, the undertaker, had come because the sheriff had sent for him. He carried his ledger under his arm. His cuffs were neat, his beard trimmed. He took pride in order. He had buried men clean and careful, even when there was no family to watch him close the lid. Now he stood with ink-stained fingers, looking at Eleanor as if she were already gone. "What entry do you want, Sheriff?" he asked, the words dry in his mouth. "Detained property," Malcolm said, "until lawful union is made." He spoke as if reciting a statute. Jonas wet his pen and wrote. The nib scratched. He paused and glanced at Eleanor. "Date, today," Malcolm said. "Time?" He considered. "Put sundown." The pen trembled. Ink thickened. Jonas wiped the blot with his thumb, leaving a faint smear he would later dream about. He closed the ledger. He could not meet Eleanor's eyes. "Water," she said. "Please." Silas raised a canteen and tilted it. The first drops hit the dirt. They flashed like small coins and were gone. He drank the rest slow while watching her. When he finished, he wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and shook the canteen so she could hear the hollow clank. "Empty," he said. The storm pressed closer. The wagon canvas rattled like teeth. Vultures drifted lower, drawing lazy loops. Somewhere on the lake, a reed bed bent and sighed. Eleanor thought of her husband's grave on the ridge. New earth, rough board. The name burned into it with a hot nail. She had not been allowed to stand there long. Jonas had touched her elbow and told her softly to go home. Sheriff Cray had closed the distance between them and said she had debts. He spoke like a banker, but his eyes had been fixed on her face. She closed her eyes and said her husband's name in her head. Tom. She held it there like a coal between her palms. The iron cut deeper when she breathed, and she welcomed the sting. Pain meant she was not yet erased. The rider came out of the dust with the evening. Horse and man turned dark in the last light. He did not move like a farmer. He did not move like a drunk ranch hand or a soldier riding a post road. He rode with a stillness that made the air notice him. The horse's hooves found rock, as if the animal remembered this path from another life. Silas swore. "Savage," he said. His hand went to his pistol. "Hold," Malcolm said. He did not draw. He watched the rider with a quiet intensity that was almost respect and almost fear. The man dismounted and walked forward. His coat was patched with deer hide along one shoulder. A powder burn scar climbed from his cheekbone toward his ear. He wore his hair bound back. His hands were empty. He brought no weapon visible, and yet the land seemed to lean toward him. He stopped in front of Eleanor and looked down at the iron on her wrists. Then he looked at her face. His eyes were dark, steady, and very old. "Keep walking," Malcolm said. The man reached out and took the chain where it was wrapped through a rusted ring, bolted to the wagon bed. He tested it with one firm pull. The links sang a low, ugly note. Eleanor's voice was a rasp. "Please," she said. One word. It cost her. The man bent and lifted a lava rock the size of a loaf. He held it in his left hand. With his right, he set the chain against the edge of the wagon iron. He struck. The sound cracked like a dry bone. Sparks leapt. He struck again, harder. The pin through the ring sheared. The chain slackened and fell against Eleanor's lap like a dead snake. Silas drew. Malcolm drew. 2 hammers clicked back. The Modoc war chief did not move. He stepped back 1 pace, palms open. He looked at Malcolm in silence. Dust ran around his boots like water around a stone. "She's mine by law," Malcolm said. The Modoc's gaze slid once to Eleanor's wrists, raw and bleeding, then back to Malcolm. He said something in his own tongue, a word shaped like wind scraping rock. Eleanor did not know it, but she felt the meaning. "No." Silas laughed. "He says no." He aimed at the man's chest. Eleanor cried out and lurched, and the loose chain dragged her forward. The sudden pull saved the Modoc's life. Silas fired. The bullet tore the wagon canvas and punched through the lake stink. Malcolm swore, not at the Modoc but at his brother's waist. "Holster," he snapped. "You shoot on my word." The Modoc stared at the hole smoking in the canvas. Then he looked again at Eleanor. Gently, he lifted the length of chain from her lap, set it aside, and held out his hand. She hesitated. Her arms trembled. Iron had hollowed her strength. She gave him one wrist, then the other. He examined the raw grooves, the swollen flesh, the places where blood had dried black. From a pouch at his belt, he took a thin strip of soft buckskin, tore it into 2 pieces, and bound her wrists. His hands were deft and careful. Eleanor began to cry. There was no sound to it. Dust turned her tears to mud. When he finished, he stepped back and nodded once, as if to say, "You are alive." "Enough," Malcolm said. His tone changed. It went flatter, colder. "You can leave, Modoc, or you can be my lesson." He raised his pistol and sighted on the man's heart. The Modoc did not look at the gun. He looked at the priest and at the undertaker, as if measuring something in them that they could not see themselves. Father Dunn's lips moved in frantic prayer. Jonas held the ledger tighter, as if it could protect him. Then the Modoc turned, took Eleanor lightly by the elbow, and lifted her to her feet. Her legs buckled. He steadied her, and together they took 1 step away from the wagon. A second shot cracked the dusk. Not from Silas, not from Malcolm. From far along the shore, another rifle spoke, a warning shot that flattened everyone's breath. The sound rolled across the water and came back thin. Malcolm tilted his head, calculating distances. He did not like surprises. "Stand fast," he said. His gun remained trained, but he did not fire. "We'll finish here at daylight. Jonas, write an addendum. Release delayed pending lawful union. Put my seal." He lowered the pistol only when Silas did. The deputy looked confused and angry, like a boy sent from a game. The Modoc took this mercy as time. He slipped his arm around Eleanor's waist and breathed one quiet word to her. "Walk." They moved into the teeth of the wind, away from the road, toward the black fields of broken stone. The landscape lifted around them in low shelves and jagged creases. Night slid down the sky like a curtain. When they had gone 20 paces, Eleanor glanced back. Malcolm Cray stood as still as a fence post watching them. His face was unreadable in the dimming light, but she knew he was not beaten. She had seen the way his eyes had fixed on the ledger. He believed in paper. He believed paper could be made stronger than iron. They entered the lava beds. The air cooled at once. Dust gave way to rock. The ground underfoot was sharp and uneven. Eleanor stumbled. The Modoc caught her elbow again and steadied her without effort. He pointed with 2 fingers toward a low crease in the ground. She saw nothing, then realized it was a trail, a narrow run of dark sand winding between black walls. It seemed part of the land's own pattern. "Your name?" she asked. Her voice was little more than breath. "Kind Poos," he said. She tried to shape it. It came out soft and wrong. He did not correct her. They went on. Night gathered and laid its weight on the fields. The wind died. Heat bled out of the rock. Eleanor's teeth chattered, though it was still summer. Kind Poos stopped, knelt, and pressed his palm to the stone. He nodded once, as if hearing an answer, and led her toward a low shelf. He pushed aside a tuft of dry grass and revealed a crack. From the crack rose air cool as a cellar. He reached his arm down and lifted a small gourd stoppered with cedar. He handed it to her. She drank slow. The water was clean and carried a faint sweetness, as if it had traveled through roots. She handed it back with shaking hands. "Thank you," she whispered. He took one swallow and restoppered the gourd. "Stone keeps," he said, tapping the shelf. "Sun cannot steal it there." They moved again. The path bent like a snake. Once they passed a flat wall where ancient etchings lived, lines and circles, a figure with spread hands. The marks were old, dust caught in their grooves. Kind Poos touched 2 fingers to the stone and bowed his head. Eleanor felt a weight in the air, like standing in a church before the altar rail, but the feeling was not fear. It was attention. Something here remembered. They reached a hollow where wind could not reach. Kind Poos crouched and built a small fire. He did it with a patience that made the act look like prayer. He stacked tinder and struck a flint. The spark kissed the grass. Flame grew small and bright. He set a hand high over it to shield the glow. "No smoke," he said, arranging the sticks to burn clean. "Smoke tells soldiers where you are." "Soldiers?" she said. He nodded. "Sheriff. Soldiers. Hunters." He shrugged, not because he did not care, but because he had carried such words for years, and their weight had become familiar. She held her bound wrists to the fire and watched the blood crust soften. He gave her a strip of dried meat and a small pinch of salt. She ate and felt the world slide back into focus inch by inch. When she finished, she leaned her head back against the stone and closed her eyes. She meant only to rest a moment. She slept. In her sleep, she dreamed of paper, sheets of it clean and wide, floating down like snow and settling on her mouth and eyes until she could not breathe. She woke with her heart racing and her hands clawing at air. Kind Poos sat across from her, awake, watching the path they had come. He heard her breath change and turned his head, his face softened by a hair's width. He pointed at her wrists and made the smallest motion, a question. She nodded. They ached, but she could feel her fingers now. Before dawn, far away, a coyote sang. The sound came thin and elastic, then faded, then rose from another ridge. Eleanor listened and thought of an organ pipe in Father Dunn's parish, the way it could make the same note sound like mourning and joy, depending on the air. The sun came up gray and slow. They put out the fire. Kind Poos smudged ash over the black scar left on the stone. He scraped the dirt with a flat rock to erase their prints. He moved like a man who had been hunted so long that erasing himself had become a form of breathing. They set off again. The ground changed. Lava gave way to low scrub and hardpan. Tule Lake stretched pale and skin-like to their left. 3 pelicans glided low, white as bones. Eleanor's feet burned. Each step was a decision. She did not ask where they were going, because she understood he would not tell her more than she needed to know. He had already told her the most important thing: walk. Behind them, as the morning finally brightened, Malcolm Cray arrived at the wagon with 2 ranch hands and a cow-bellied bay. The men combed the shore and found the broken chain, the torn canvas, and boot prints leading into the rock. There were other prints too, lighter and half scuffed by wind. Savage helped her, one man said. Malcolm squatted and studied the marks. The surface told a story if you knew how to ask. He traced a boot heel with his finger. He did not smile. Jonas, he said without turning his head. The undertaker had come again, summoned by a boy on a lathered pony. He stood with his ledger against his ribs. He felt like a man called to measure a coffin for someone still standing. Sheriff? Right. Fugitive. Abducted. Make it clean. Malcolm rose. And bring your seal. Jonas opened the ledger. The earlier line stared back at him. Detained property. He should have left more space. He squeezed the new words under the old like a lie pushed into a small room. He sprinkled sand on the ink to make it dry faster. When he lifted the page, a few grains stuck and left the letters gritty. He blew them off with a breath that shook. Father Dunn stood a little apart, his face gray with a sleepless night. He looked at the broken chain and felt the heat in his cheeks. Heat of shame. He had dreamed of a blank line in his register, and in the dream, the blank line had been a mouth opening and opening. Sheriff, he said, and stopped. What is it, Father? I cannot. He swallowed. You ask me to write a marriage where there is none. I ask you to prepare a record, Malcolm said. Preparation is not sin. It is prudence. His voice was reasonable, almost kind. We will make it proper, and we will protect her. Do you want the other men here to decide what becomes of a widow alone, or men worse than men? Savage hands. He nodded toward the lava beds. Father Dunn closed his eyes. He saw his parish lit by candles. He saw a girl with a veil over her face. He saw a boy on his knees. He saw the war years, when he had hidden bottles under floorboards and called them oil for the lamp. He opened his eyes. I will not lie in my book, he said. The words surprised him. He had not known he would say them. Malcolm looked at him and said nothing for a long time. Then he turned to Silas. Ride to Fort Klamath, he said. Tell them we have abduction by hostile elements. We require assistance. He put his hat on and looked once more at the path into the rock. He lowered his voice so only Silas and Jonas could hear. And spread word there's coin for anyone who brings her back, or brings me the man who took her. Twice the coin, if he's breathing when I see him. He spoke the last sentence with a calm that chilled Jonas more than rage would have done. Silas grinned. We'll have them by Sunday, he said. Bring me a week, Malcolm said. Bring me a month. I'll take my time. By mid-morning, notices went up along fences and saloon doors. Reward for the return of one Eleanor Hart, widow, wrongfully taken by hostile party. $20 for information that leads to her recovery. $50 for the capture of the hostile, named or unnamed. The notices were written in a schoolteacher's hand. Men stood and read them with squinted eyes, then looked at each other and at the line of black rock on the horizon. A boy traced the letters with a dirty finger and asked his father what hostile meant. The father said, someone between you and your supper. In the lava beds, the day burned white. Heat lay on the ground like a sheet. Kind Poos taught Eleanor how to walk on the rock, so her steps made less sound. He showed her how to place her foot along the edge of a stone, so the heel glanced, rather than thudded. He wrapped 2 more thin buckskin strips around her ankles, where the boots rubbed raw. He watched the sky as if it could tell him things. When a hawk pinned itself high and still, he studied its shadow on the ground instead of the bird itself. They came to a low bowl of land, ringed by rock teeth and stunted juniper. In the center of the bowl stood a solitary post of pine, jammed into a crack. Rags hung from it, weathered to colorless strips. The place felt like a sentence left half-finished. Kindpoos stopped and put his palm on the post, with the same quiet respect he had shown the petroglyphs. Eleanor waited. He spoke then, not to her, and not in English. The cadence was like the rhythm of walking. Step, breathe, step. He took a small piece of jerky and set it at the base of the post. He whispered a name she did not understand, then one she did. Lost River. The syllables turned heavy in the heat. He looked at her and searched her face. You know this? He asked. I know there was a war, she said. They told us you hid in the rocks and shot men like ghosts. She regretted the words as soon as she said them. He nodded once. We hid, he said. We died. You call this hiding. We call this home. He lifted his hand from the post. The dead hear words. Better we say good ones. I'm sorry, she said. He made a small gesture that dismissed apology without cruelty, as if to say sorrow was another weight the land already carried. They rested in the bowl through the hottest hour. Kindpus showed her how to gather water from a seep that hid under a shoulder of stone. He wrapped sage around a small stick and used it to sweep away their prints. He taught her 3 hand signs. Stop, quiet, blood. She repeated them until her fingers knew them better than her mouth knew new words. When they moved on, a thin line of smoke rose far south. It was too straight for a cook fire, too pale for a stump burning. Kindpus watched it a long time. Then he showed Eleanor how to build a small fire that made almost no smoke and how to smother it quick with a flat rock if someone called from the hills. Soldier smoke goes up, he said. Ours goes along the ground. Near dusk, they reached a stand of willows, along a narrow run of water that tried to pretend it was a creek. Dragonflies flickered like splinters of sky. Mud squeezed between Eleanor's boot soles and the rock. Kindpus knelt and pressed his ear to the ground. He made a face like a man listening to the end of a story he did not like. Horses, he said. Many. He looked at the willow tops. A few trembled, though there was no wind. Sheriff? She asked. Men who follow coin, he said. It did not matter to him what name such men wore. He took Eleanor's hand and led her through the water, stepping on stones so their feet left less sign. They followed the creek bed until it widened, and the willows thickened into a green screen. He stopped so suddenly she almost ran into him. He lifted his hand, palm back. Stop. From the far side of the willows came the muffled thud of hooves and the clatter of tack. Men's voices slurred and rose. A laugh, a cough, the smell of tobacco. One voice carried clear. Saw the notice. 50 if we bring the buck in breathing. 10 extra if he carries a scalp belt. A second voice. Sheriff will take the woman for himself. Always said he didn't care for seconds. But you see how that goes. Laughter. A third voice, low and mean. Paper says abducted. I say, she ran. Makes no difference. Coin spends. Eleanor's stomach roped. She looked at Kindpus. He was statue still, eyes half-lidded, listening to the land more than to the men. He moved his hand through the air, quiet. Then he pointed at the water and drew a line with his finger along its surface. Go with the flow. She nodded. They slid deeper into the willows, letting the green hold them. The men passed. 5 riders. 1 mule loaded with sacks that clinked, bottles, or traps. The last rider turned his head as if he had felt a thought. He stared straight into the screen. His eyes slid past them without focus. He spat and rode on. When the sounds died, Kindpus did not move for many breaths. He knew men sometimes ride quiet for 20 paces and then turn back. He watched the path behind them until the dragonflies settled on the same reeds again. Only then did he touch Eleanor's shoulder and nod, safe enough to breathe. Night gathered again. The willow run emptied into a small, dark pond. Kindpus led her around its edge, placing her boot tips on the same mud-hard clumps he used. Frogs grunted. A heron lifted, slow and annoyed, and flapped off toward the lake. Across the pond, above a low rise, a single lantern glowed in a small cabin window. Eleanor's heart kicked. Light meant people. People meant water. People also meant talk. Kindpus watched her see the window. He shook his head. Not yet. He held up 2 fingers, then pointed south, around. They circled the cabin at a distance. A dog barked once, twice, then lay down, bored. A woman's voice drifted out, humming something that might have been a hymn if you'd never heard hymns and only heard the wind. Eleanor thought of Father Dunn's chapel. She thought of the blank line in the register. They slept that night in a shallow cave, roofed by a fallen slab. The cave was little more than a shadow, dry, cool, out of the wind. Kindpus gave Eleanor his jacket and slept with his back to the opening, his rifle propped across his knees. She woke once to find him tracing a small shape in the dust with his finger, a circle with lines radiating. A sun, a flower, a map. He smudged it with his palm when he saw her looking, and smiled so faintly she almost missed it. He did not speak. At dawn, when the ground was blue and the birds had not yet decided to sing, a figure came stumbling along the willow line, small, barefoot, a girl. She moved like someone trying to be quiet without knowing how. She carried something wrapped in a cloth bundle hugged tight to her chest. Kindpoos heard her first. He touched Eleanor's ankle and raised 2 fingers. Wait. The girl slipped, caught herself, and hissed in pain. She sat hard and clutched her bundle closer. She looked toward the pond, then toward the cabin light behind the rise, and then toward the black teeth of the lava. She chose the lava. She was 15 at most, with hair cut ragged to her jaw and a line of dirt across her cheek like a war stripe. When she was near enough to see their cave, she froze. Kindpoos did not move. Eleanor lifted a hand. Slow. It's all right, she said, keeping her voice low and even. We won't harm you. The girl's eyes went to Eleanor's bound wrists. She saw the raw skin and the buckskin ties. Something in her face shifted, a small, hard recognition. She crawled the last few steps and pushed the bundle into Eleanor's lap. Eleanor opened it and found a heel of bread, 2 boiled eggs, and a tin cup with a dent in it. At the bottom lay a tiny folded paper tied with thread. Eleanor looked up. The girl's mouth trembled. My name is Clara, she said. Clara Mayfield. They say I'm too young to know anything. I know enough. The sheriff swore to kill anyone who helps you. She jerked her chin at the eggs and bread. So, eat quick. Eleanor's throat closed. Where are your people? She asked. Clara's eyes went flat a moment, as if she were being asked to open a door that led nowhere. Gone, she said. They took my ma in the spring when the cough came. My pa went after their cattle and didn't come back. The sheriff says he left a note. I never saw it. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand and tried to stand, but a cut on her foot split, and she winced. Kindpoos reached for her ankle, and she flinched like a kicked dog. He only lifted her heel and looked. He made a small approving sound in his throat and wrapped her foot with a strip torn from his sleeve. Better, he said. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. She pointed to the folded paper. That's for you, from Jonas. He couldn't give it to you in town. There are eyes. She glanced toward the cabin light. Mrs. Stokes let me slip out. She said I was going to gather eggs. I took them first. Eleanor untied the thread with clumsy fingers. She unfolded the paper. The writing was cramped and careful. Eleanor recognized Jonas's hand. The note was only 2 sentences. Eleanor. The ledger shows detained and abducted. The sheriff made me write both. Your husband's entry, Tom Hart, was altered after I left it at the parish. The cause now reads fever. It was blank when I laid down my pen. Ink blurred where a drop had fallen and dried. A faint smear crossed the word parish, as if a finger had tried to wipe it away and thought better of it. Eleanor read the lines twice. Her chest burned. She passed the paper to Kindpoos. He studied it a long time. He did not read English easily, but he read faces. He saw what the paper did to her. He folded it and handed it back. Paper is rope, he said. Clara leaned forward. He means to burn them, she whispered. The Modoc. He told Silas last night. I was under the porch. He said if he couldn't have you for his house, he'd smoke you out of their holes and take you off a body. Her eyes flicked to Kindpoos and then away. Fear and something like shame. I don't want him to kill anyone else. She bit her lip until it bled. He will, though. Eleanor looked at Kindpoos. His face did not change, but his hands closed until the knuckles went white. He glanced toward the south where the land dipped and a faint smear of soldier smoke stained the sky. He looked back at Clara and nodded once. Good you came, he said. You go back now. Go slow. Leave no prints. Clara shook her head hard. I can't go back. They watch me. They'll smell it on me. She lifted her chin. Take me with you. She said it like a dare. I can carry. I can run. I can be quiet if you show me how. Kindpoos looked at Eleanor. He did not decide for both of them. He was a chief, but not her owner. Eleanor felt the old ache in her wrists and the new steadiness in her legs. She thought of a girl hiding under a porch, holding her breath while men planned a burning. She nodded. You stay, she said to Clara. But what you need to know is this. The sheriff's word is wind. The records lie when he touches them. If you stay with us, You become the kind of person he loves to hunt. She said it without drama. She wanted the girl to hear it clean. Clara's mouth squared. I was already that kind, she said. I just didn't have anybody to run with. They ate the bread and eggs. Kindpoos cut a willow switch and showed Clara where to place her feet in mud, so the water sealed her prints. He taught her the 3 hand signs in silence. She learned fast. She had been learning how to survive since spring. By noon, they were in the deeper teeth of the lava again. The heat pressed down. The land smelled like iron and dust and something older. The 3 of them moved as one line of shadow. Kindpoos led them along a rim where wind slid off the rock and left a thin, cool ribbon of air. He stopped at a cairn, built of rounded stones, and tapped it twice with his knuckles. He did not explain. It was not for them. It was for the ones who listened. Down in the flat country, a posse of 7 men pushed their horses toward the lava. Malcolm Cray rode at the front. Silas rode beside him, grinning at a thought he did not share. 2 soldiers from the fort came behind, eyes wary. Dr. Lucien Vey, the post surgeon, had elected to ride along as a matter of medical prudence, he told himself. He had seen men come back from the beds, shattered by heat and stone. He wanted to avoid more burials than necessary. His bag hung from his saddle horn and bumped his knee. He adjusted it and told himself again that he was not here for sport. "Where's your warrant, Sheriff?" one soldier asked. His tone was mild but not friendly. He had seen counties where lawmen were worse than gangs. Malcolm did not turn his head. "She's a fugitive," he said. "I am the warrant." Dr. Vey watched the sheriff's profile and made a small note in his mind. He did that with men. He folded them into categories and wrote them in invisible ink in a ledger only he could see. He had a column for courage and a column for vanity and a long, thin column for hunger. He wondered which line would fill first for Malcolm Cray. They reached the outer edge of the lava beds at late afternoon. Heat ripples made the world swim. Malcolm halted and studied the terrain. The land looked like a frozen sea. Waves of black glass rose and fell. Cuts and cracks formed canyons that were only as wide as a man. There were holes that went down into cool dark. There were bridges of stone and tunnels worn by wind. It was one thing to look at such country, and another to go down into it after someone who knew it, like the lines in his palm. Malcolm did not like the feeling of being above a thing he could not command. He lifted his hand, and the posse dismounted. "We go on foot," he said. "Tie the horses in the shade. This is a snake den. You shoot only when you see the eyes." Silas snorted and spun his pistol on his finger. "What if there are no eyes?" "Then you still don't shoot," Malcolm said. He looked at the soldier who had asked about warrants. "You and your friend, watch our back trail. These people move behind you as easy as in front." Dr. Vey slid down and adjusted his bag. He felt foolish carrying a doctor's satchel into a place built for ghosts, but the weight steadied him. He fell in behind the last man and put his boots where Malcolm's boots had gone. He told himself he was a witness. Their shadows lengthened. The lava swallowed them. The air cooled a degree. A vulture rode the last heat above and then drifted away, bored of human pace. In the rock ahead, 3 shapes paused. Kindpoos felt the earth with his foot, not the surface, but the way the heat moved in the pocket of air below. He turned and took Eleanor and Clara a different way, moving diagonally along a seam, the same color as air. He knew this way because his grandmother had pointed at it when he was a boy and said, "That crack is our cousin. It goes where we go." He had laughed then. Now he understood. They crossed a narrow bridge where the rock fell away on both sides into cool black. Clara looked down and saw the water glinting far below like a sleeping eye. She swallowed her fear. She placed her feet where Kindpoos placed his feet. Her breath made little clouds. They reached a shelf where wind had carved low chairs from stone. Kindpoos motioned them down. "Wait," he said. He handed Clara the gourd. "Slow." He touched Eleanor's wrist, not to comfort but to count. He was measuring her pulse. It beat hard, but even. He nodded. From somewhere behind them, the echo of a voice bounced and broke. Silas laughed too loud at something. The sound came warped by the rock, as if from underwater. Kindpoos closed his eyes. He could almost name the crack they would choose by the way the laughter returned. He tapped a rhythm on the stone with his fingernail and listened to how it died. "Here," he said. He led them into a split, so narrow they had to turn sideways. He took Eleanor's hands and guided them to hold the rough face. "Breathe small," he said. "The rock breathes with you." They stood that way for many heartbeats. Boots scuffed on rock nearby. A man cursed as he scraped his knuckles. A soldier said softly, "Hold up." A pause. The pause stretched. Malcolm's voice low. "Feel that?" Another man. "What?" Malcolm. "Cold air." A shuffle of feet repositioning. Dr. Vey. "Likely a vent. Air moves through these old tubes." Malcolm. "Or a door." He knocked his knuckles lightly against the wall above Eleanor's head. The sound jumped like a startled animal. He moved on, and the others followed. Clara let out her breath. It shook, and she bit the inside of her cheek to quiet it. Eleanor looked at Caintpoos. He had not moved. He listened until even the memory of footsteps had faded. Only then did he ease them back into the light. They traveled again, until the sky thinned to evening. In the west, a dirty gold band clung to the edge of the world. Caintpoos stopped on a height that looked down over a scatter of brush and a tiny fold of green where water made a brief promise. He crouched and pointed. Below, a small circle of stones marked an old camp. The stones were blackened. In the middle lay a ring of ash white as milk. He touched Eleanor's sleeve and shook his head. Old fire. Not safe. He led them half a mile farther to a place that looked like nothing, just a deeper shadow under an overhang. He smiled then, a real smile. "Home," he said, but the word did not mean house. It meant for a night. "We live." They slept in turns. Caintpoos ate little and listened much. Eleanor dreamed of lines again, not paper this time, but the fine lines on Jonas Pike's face. She dreamed she was lifting his skin like parchment and reading the worry written under it. She woke with her hand reaching out and found only stone. Near midnight, a glow pulsed on the southern horizon. It was not lightning. It did not flicker like a campfire. It was steadier and low. Caintpoos felt it in his teeth. He stood and walked to the edge of their shelf and stared. A moment later the wind carried a smell that had no place in wild land. Coal oil and raw pitch. Fire the way soldiers carried it. He came back and put his hand on Eleanor's shoulder. His face was quiet, but his eyes held an old hurt, rising like a bruise. "They burn," he said. "Where?" she asked. He pointed with his chin toward a slope she did not know by name. "A place where old women tell stories," he said. "Stories walk away from fire. Old women do not." He looked at Clara and saw the girl understood without knowing the names. He put out his hand, and she took it without pride. In the morning, there would be ash downwind, and in that ash, small footprints of creatures that had run. In the morning, there would be men's voices counting, and men's hands breaking what the fire had not finished. In the morning, a plan formed in Malcolm Cray's mouth, like a knife, but night still lay heavy. Above the glow of the burning, one star held steady, refusing to waver in the heat. Eleanor watched it. She pressed her wrists together and felt the tender skin catch on the buckskin bindings. She thought, not chain, not paper, not fire. She thought, walk. Clara sat with her back against the wall and her eyes open, listening to Caintpoos breathe. She had not slept that kind of sleep since the winter before last. She would not sleep it now. She was the kind of person men hunted when they needed to say they were doing God's work, and she knew it. The knowledge fit her like a second skin. It did not make her smaller. It made her sharp. Far below, boots moved where no boots should be. Malcolm raised his hand, and the men behind him halted. He knelt and lifted a length of chain from the ground. He turned it in his hands. Blood blackened one link. He smiled without showing his teeth. "Careless," he said. He slid the broken piece into his coat pocket like a keepsake. Later, in his deposition, this piece would not be entered into evidence. Later, the line where it should have appeared would be left blank, then erased. But for now he carried it like a token and felt its weight against his ribs. He drew a slow breath and tasted coal oil on the wind. He closed his eyes. "We go at dawn," he said. We give the rats a night to think they are safe. At first light, before the men moved, a girl's footprint appeared on a shelf of cool dust, where no posse had climbed. It was small and bare, and pointed north. It was not there a moment before. It would not be there a moment after, because Kindpoos would brush it away with a juniper bough. But for that single breath between night and morning, it existed, a truth. The land whispered and kept. Clara lifted her chin and looked at Eleanor. "He'll burn the village," she said. "He told Silas he would. He'll burn the fields, and he'll say it was God's will, because men took a widow out of a chain." Her voice did not tremble now. It had found its shape. "We can't let him find them." Eleanor nodded. Fear worked its hands along her ribs and then set them down. She tied her hair back with a strip of cloth and stood. "Then we move first," she said. "We move now." Kindpoos listened to the wind that slid along the stone and carried a scent of smoke and hot metal. He closed his eyes a moment and murmured a name that meant, in his language, the place where you choose which story becomes true. He opened his eyes and looked at the two beside him, the widow with raw wrists and the girl with a new bandage and a hard mouth. He nodded once. He picked up his rifle. He did not look heroic. He looked like a man walking toward a task that had waited for him since before he was born. They moved at first light, slipping between black ribs of stone and patches of willow and sage, following a trail that only the land seemed to know. Kindpoos set the pace. Not fast, not slow, just steady, a walk that could last a day and then another. Eleanor counted her breaths to match his steps. Clara watched the sky, reading the wind by how it scraped the tops of the brush. When the heat came on, they cut across a spine of lava where the air ran cooler. When the rock warmed like a stove, they dropped into a crease where thin grass grew the color of old rope and a few flowers clung like survivors. Kindpoos taught them without wasting words. He showed them how to find a trickle hidden under a slab by touching the stone and listening for a hollow coolness that meant water moved below. He taught Eleanor to save a mouthful by rolling it on her tongue before swallowing. He showed Clara how to break a twig clean, so the break looked like animal nibble, not human snap. He gathered a handful of red earth and sifted it onto the top of Eleanor's boot to dull the shine the sun liked too much. Near midday, a red-tailed hawk circled. Kindpoos watched the shadow, not the bird, and turned them along a ledge where the shadow lost them. Far to the south, a faint plume of smoke rose and spread like a thin hand. He tapped his rifle butt twice on the ground and glanced at Eleanor. He did not have to say what it meant. The sheriff was not waiting. The sheriff was pushing. By afternoon, they reached a run of low caves, the color of dull iron. The ground in front of them was swept clean, not by wind, but by hands. Kindpoos crouched and touched a mark near one entrance that might have been a smear of soot or might have been a sign. He cupped his palm and breathed across it. Ash lifted in the shape of a crescent moon and drifted away. He nodded once and motioned them inside the smallest cave. The air was cool as a cellar. The floor rose and fell in shallow waves, the way lava freezes when it has already started to forget the shape it had as liquid. On one wall, someone long ago had pressed a palm into soft ash and left a print with a missing first finger. Eleanor set her hand near it. Hers small, new. The old one large, ancient. She felt steadier with the two shapes side by side. Kindpoos lit a small coal with flint and tucked it under a nest of dry moss that burned without smoke. The light made the walls breathe. He spoke then of Lost River, in the plain way a man speaks when he has told a thing so many times that it is no longer for the teller, but for the listener. Soldiers had come when the ground was white with frost, and a thin skin of ice lay on the water. Talks broke like brittle glass. Shots cracked. His people ran to the rocks because the rocks had always taken care of them. They fired and hit because the land taught them where to stand. They buried their dead in crevices and marked the places with small stones, not to be found by eyes that did not know how to see. He said he had led women and children through cuts of black that turned men back. He said he had carried a boy and a story at the same time. And when he reached the cave and laid the boy down, the story kept breathing, and the boy did not. He said he had killed, because killing was the only way to make a door sometimes. He did not ask forgiveness. He set the words down like stones. Eleanor listened, her wrists cradled in the buckskin bindings that now felt less like bandages and more like a kind of mark. She wanted to say a prayer for the boy's mother, for the soldier who had fired, for the one who had not fired and never told anyone he had kept his finger still. She wanted to say the prayer the way Father Dunn would have said it, and she could not make her mouth move. Instead, she folded Jonas's note again, the one that said Tom's cause of death had been filled in after the undertaker stepped away. She held the note tight until the edges softened with sweat. Paper is rope, Kindpoos had said. She understood now how it could be both gallows and lifeline, depending on the hand that tied the knot. Clara sat with her knees up and her arms wrapped round them. Her eyes tracked the cave mouth and then returned to Kindpoos's face. "My ma told stories," she said. "She made me say thank you to the creek when we took water. She said we borrow it and we return it." She swallowed. When the cough got bad and she couldn't sit up, I brought her water and held it to her lip, and she said thank you with her eyes. The sheriff's man marked her down for burial, but wouldn't let me see where. Jonas did what he could. She stared at the floor until her eyes stopped burning. If there are old women telling stories out there, we can't leave them to a sheriff's match. "We won't," Eleanor said. The words came before she knew she was going to speak. They surprised her, and also did not. Her fear was still there, but it had a shape now, and the shape left room for something that felt like courage in work clothes. Late-day heat gathered again. Kindpoos took the little coal and smothered it under a flat stone. He brushed the cave floor with a bunch of sage until their prints blurred into the same rough as everything else. They slid back into the light. They angled toward a low ridge that separated the lava beds from patchier ground, where settlers had grazed cattle, until the grass peeled back and left dirt. Here and there, fences had been started and then given up on, posts leaning like tired men. A windmill creaked over a dry well. A crow sat on the beam and considered all this with the patient eye of a bird used to outlasting everyone. They needed to know what Malcolm planned and where. The only way to learn that was to pull at one of the threads in his knot. They chose Jonas Pike because he was the kind of thread that frays when the knot is tightened. Kindpoos knew a place where two rocks leaned and made a listening gallery. He sent Eleanor and Clara there with a motion of his hand and then ghosted toward town. He did not go into the street. He moved along the rear of buildings where barrels and broken wagons rotted, where the ground was soft and took prints, and where he knew how to not leave any. He watched the undertaker's narrow house from the back alley where the ash bin stood. At last, the side door opened, and Jonas came out with his sleeves rolled and his ledger under his arm. As if the book were an infant, he took for air. Kindpoos spoke his name once, the way you speak a name to an old horse from behind, so it knows not to kick. Jonas started and turned, eyes wide. He recognized the man from the shore, because the kind of fear a lawman felt around such a man was memorable. Jonas lifted his free hand, not sure whether to surrender or bless himself. "Don't kill me," he said before his better sense checked his mouth. Kindpoos's face did not change. "Come," he said, and in the way he said it, Jonas heard there was no room for not. They met at the leaning rocks. Eleanor stepped into the light. Jonas flinched as if he were seeing a ghost. "You're alive," he said. Then, smaller, to himself, "Of course you are. Someone broke the chain. Someone always does in the stories I didn't believe." Eleanor held up her wrists. "You saw the chain," she said. "You wrote the word detained. Did you also see the burial line for my husband? Did you see the way it moved when no one was looking?" Jonas swallowed. "I laid the page at the parish," he said, "and when I came back the line had changed. Father Dunn wouldn't have done that. He's got a spine. Weak men bend in straight lines. He bends in gentle ones you don't notice, until he stands against fire." Jonas rubbed his forehead, as if the ink on his fingers might find something on his skin and erase it. "The sheriff has a seal that opens doors, not just any doors. Doors where men think they do God's work, by letting him through. Clara was watching the path behind Jonas. She had learned to do two things at once. "What's he going to burn?" she asked. "Where? Tell us clean." Jonas looked at Kindpoos before he answered, because he understood whose land he was naming. "There's a camp on the East Run, a place the soldiers call Devil's Crock, because the ground curves like a pot. There are women there, old ones. They send the boys and the strong ones through a cut to the north when they feel a raid coming. The sheriff means to ride the east rim, pour oil, and light above the vent, where the smoke will pull the fire down." He said it fast, as if saying it slower would make it soak deeper into the world. Kindpoos put his hand on the stone beside him and breathed. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were calm again. "How many men?" he asked. 7 or 8 of his," Jonas said. "2 soldiers to give it a badge. Another 3 who follow coin for its jingle. Silas rides with him." He swallowed. "It's worse." "Say it," Eleanor said. Jonas opened the ledger and showed a loose sheet folded between pages. It was not his paper. The fibers were smooth and expensive. Across it ran words in Malcolm Cray's hand. Jonas had copied nothing. He had stolen a glance while the sheriff took whiskey and left his desk open. He had walked home with those words burning into his head, so he could rewrite them in the only way he knew, small and neat and true. "He means to fix the marriage, if he gets you, by registering it the day before it happens," he said. "He brought me his deposition to sign. The line where the change should be entered was scraped. There's a brown smear on the margin. I thought it was tobacco. It looks like old blood." He tapped the copied words. He writes, "To prevent further abduction, I took custody of the widow as law permits. Parish notified to record union at earliest convenience." He means to take your name away before you even speak. Clara made a sound that was too bitter to be a laugh. "Paper again," she said. "Always paper. They write one thing and then drag you to it." Kindpoos nodded once. "So we take his paper," he said simply, "and we take his fire." Father Dunn, at that hour, sat at his narrow desk with the parish register open and his head in his hands. The book smelled like beeswax and coal smoke and dried flowers pressed by hands now dust. The page for this month had 5 entries. 2 infants baptized, 1 funeral, 1 marriage between a boy and a girl who looked as though they had never done a mean thing, and a blank line that pulled his gaze like a magnet. He drew his finger down the blankness and stopped. There, faint but real, a hand had written Eleanor Hart and Malcolm Cray and the word lawful, as if the word could reach out and argue with God. The ink had been rubbed hard, and the quill had cut the fibers, so the groove itself held the shape of the letters. Someone had tried to scrub it out with a wet thumb, and had dirtied the blankness with a faint reddish smear. Father Dunn stared until his eyes stung. He lifted his pen. He could draw the ink thick over that scar and call it fresh. He could leave it and call it resistance. He could tear the page and call it penance. He set the pen down and stood. He went to the door and locked it. He knelt. "Lord," he said, and his voice cracked like old wood. "If I cannot be strong, make me loud. If I cannot be loud, make me unbendable." He stood again and laid a sheet of paper over the scar. He traced the groove with blunt pressure, as one might take an impression of a headstone. He folded the rubbing into his sleeve. Dr. Lucien Vey, that evening, wrote in his own neat hand, by lamplight in the Fort Infirmary. His record was not official, the way the sheriff's would be. It was a surgeon's diary, observations to be refined later if needed. He noted the heat index, the rate of dehydration he had seen in a cavalryman, the number of flies risen at the mess tent. Then he wrote a line he had never written before in any posting. Reported rumors of abduction by savages seem inconsistent with the subject's circumstances. Subject described widely as a widow of good character. He paused, then added, "A certain zeal evidences itself in the county officer's plan that may exceed prudent scope." He did not name Malcolm Cray because he did not yet dare to, but the page knew the name anyway, as ink knows a quill. He blew the candle out and sat in the dark until he realized that he was not watching for sleep, but listening for fire. Near nightfall, the 3 in the lava beds made for Devil's Crock by a line that only Kindpoos could see. He had walked it in fog and rain and ash, and once under moonlight so bright it sharpened his shadow like a blade. He walked it now, with two people whose feet he trusted to learn. Eleanor's breath was steady. Clara's was quick but not ragged. They moved like a small herd of creatures that had decided to live. They reached the east rim as the sky went the color of boiled bones. From there, the ground fell into a bowl. At the bottom, a small tangle of brush and 3 low shelters huddled at the base of a wall. No smoke, no light. Kindpoos tasted the air. He smelled old cooking and the faint sour of a place where children once played. He heard no voices. He breathed deeper. There, behind the rock, a shift of weight, the smallest scrape. He clicked his tongue once. A sound like a cricket. An answering click came from the shadow of the wall. Kindpoos touched Eleanor's arm and motioned her to wait. He went down the slope on the balls of his feet. He stopped 6 paces from the shadow and crouched. An old woman stepped out. She was thin and straight as a stick and wore her hair in 2 gray braids. Her face was carved by laughter lines that had forgotten how to laugh. She looked at Kindpoos, then at the 2 women above, then back at him. She said his name, and then a string of words too fast for Eleanor to follow. He answered with a deferent tilt of his head. Whatever she said next made his mouth bend with respect. Eleanor and Clara came down and stood a step back, not because they were shy, but because the space between the 2 elders felt like a doorway they should not crowd. The old woman's eyes were sharp. She marked Eleanor's bound wrists, the buckskin, the raw grooves that would scar. She marked Clara's bandaged foot and the hard set of her mouth. Her gaze returned to Kindpoos. He spoke. He used his hands more than usual, as if to draw a picture in the dark for someone who knew the shapes already. The old woman nodded once. She gestured toward the shelter and made a motion, like setting a pot in a safe place. Kindpoos shook his head and signaled fire moving with the wind. He pointed to the rim, where the sheriff would come. The old woman looked up to the east. The line of sky above the rim showed a dull smear that was not cloud. She spit once on the ground, not insult, but ritual. She made a sound in her throat that Eleanor did not know, but understood. So, they mean to try that. There were 3 other women in the camp, all older than the old woman, but none with her steel. A 4th lay on a pallet with her leg splinted, a child's toy. 3 sticks tied in a cross, sat abandoned in dust. There were no boys, no young men. Those had gone north by a cut that led to a place Kindpoos said like a lullaby. The old woman pointed to the splinted leg and then to the rim. Kindpoos shook his head again. He touched the woman's forehead and spoke softly, the way one speaks to someone who will not be racing anyone again. They worked. Kindpoos sent Clara to gather armloads of damp earth from the seep, where a trickle kept the ground cool. He sent Eleanor to pull green willow and lay it in a curve where the rim would catch flame. He scraped a shallow trench along the top of the vent hole. He showed Eleanor how the air moved there, how a torn scrap of cloth lifted and fell. Fire breathes, he said. We make it breathe wrong. He packed the trench with damp earth and green willow. He set stones in a pattern that looked aimless if you didn't know the breath of a fire. Clara returned with her arms black with mud. She looked like a creature born of the place. She saw a coil of rope near one shelter, old, stiff, fit to lash a bundle. She hated it at once for looking like the chain. She forced her hands to take it. She dragged a length to Kindpoos. He laid it across the vent and stacked stones on it in a way that made no sense to Eleanor until he pulled one end and watched the stack shift and settle to choke a gap. A door we can close with one hand, he said. When they light, we pull. The old woman watched all this with the faint smile of someone seeing a grandson remember his lessons. At last she went to the pallet and sat by the woman with the splint. She took the woman's hand and began to sing a song so soft the wind had to lean close to hear. Night came, and with it the sheriff, quiet in the last stretch because Malcolm Cray understood theater. He set his men along the rim like ugly statues. He gave each a can of coal oil. He did not light his first. He waited until the soldiers had struck flame, and then he touched his wick to theirs, as if the government leaned its fire into his. Silas looked down into the bowl and licked his upper lip. "They'll run like rabbits," he said. "No," Malcolm said. "They'll choke and lie still. Fire will climb their breath." He said it like a man reciting a recipe. Dr. Vey stood one ridge back. He told himself he was there to witness. He told himself if it went wrong, he would be needed. He told himself what men tell themselves when they cannot tell themselves the truth. The first oil fell. Flame crawled along the rim in a pretty lace. It licked toward the vent, and then hesitated, as if thinking. Kindpoos's rope lay ready in his hands. He waited. He knew how long a fire thinks. When it is made lazy by oil. The smoke leaned inward as the heated air rose from below, ready to draw the flame down, like water down a plug hole. Kindpoos nodded once to Eleanor. She grabbed the far end of the rope. Clara wrapped her hands and took the middle. "Now," Kindpoos said, and they pulled. The rope slid. The stone stack fell just so. Dirt avalanched into the vent, and the breath of the fire stuttered. Instead of falling into the bowl, the flame ran along the rim like a fox denied a henhouse door. Silas swore. "They're doing tricks," he said. He kicked a loose stone into the bowl. It clattered and rattled and hit the packed willow and stuck there, confused. "Pour more," Malcolm said, as calm as ever. He could out-stubborn water if you gave him time. Men poured. Fire thickened. Smoke rolled. Down below, the old woman's song did not change. Kindpoos moved them like pieces in a game played on a board, only he could see fully. He shifted 2 stones here, pulled the rope a foot there, opened a small breathing slit where smoke needed to escape to keep from backing into the shelter. He pointed Eleanor to a second rope hidden under brush. She hauled and felt the ground answer. The air flowed differently. Fire moved along the edge again, chewing green willow and spitting it out. Clara peered up at the rim and saw silhouettes and flames behind them. She felt anger rise clean, not wild, like a well. She took a small handful of dust and tossed it into the air, above the vent. The dust climbed, and then fell in a curl, and she laughed once under her breath. "Breathe wrong," she whispered to the fire, copying Kindpoos. On the rim, a man with more courage than sense edged closer, to pour again, and his boots slipped, and he sat down hard, with both legs dangling above the bowl. He cursed, threw his can wildly, and struck the far rocks where the oil flared in a useless flower. Dr. Vey grabbed the back of the man's coat and hauled him out before Malcolm could speak. The doctor's breath came fast. He decided he was done pretending he was not part of it now. "Try the south side," Silas said. "Wind's different there." "Wind is the same everywhere," Malcolm said. "It is men who change." He watched the smoke. He did not understand what he was seeing, but he did understand that someone below him knew more about breathing than he did. He did not like that knowledge. He stepped back from the rim. "New plan," he said. "We go down. We pull them out and choke the air with our hands." One of the soldiers coughed into his sleeve and said, very mild, "My orders did not say to enter the beds at night." Malcolm turned his head just enough to show he had heard, and then he went first. He took the path Kindpoos had used sometimes in boyhood, because Kindpoos had made that path years ago, and paths like to be walked the way they were made. Malcolm's boots fit it well enough. He did not know the places where a foot should pause. He went without pausing, because that was his way. That was sometimes enough. He reached a shelf above the shelters and raised his pistol. He did not see anyone, which he took as proof of cowardice. He did not consider that someone might stand very still, so the rock would keep him company. He moved left. He stepped on a stone set just so, and the stone tipped and slid and made a sound like a shovel biting into gravel. Everyone heard it at once. Below, Kindpoos touched Eleanor's shoulder, and she pressed the rope solid. Clara slid between 2 stones like a lizard and came up inside the shallowest shelter. She felt the old woman's hand on her hair for a heartbeat, and then the hand was gone, because the old woman had work to do, which was to keep singing. A shape glided from the shadow behind Malcolm and stood where a shot would go into the rock if it went at all. He sighted on the movement and then held, because a second shape rose on his right, and choices made guns clumsy. He lowered the pistol a hair and stepped back, and his heel found the lip of a small hole. He did not fall. He had a very strong back. He locked his knees and settled his weight forward and grinned because he liked nearly falling and catching himself more than he liked whiskey. It proved the ground would not have him yet. "Come out," he said. "We'll make this easy." "Easy for who?" Clara said from the shelter, and he flinched because the voice was a girl's. Dr. Vey eased along a ridge until he could see down. He saw 2 figures and then 3, and realized the place was full of people. In the way, a forest is full of animals you will never notice until you decide to stand still. He sat on his heels and held his breath and thought, "This is murder if we go a step farther." The word made him dizzy. Then he thought, so is walking away, if they choose to light the rim again. He looked for law in his memory and found only men with pens. He decided there was only the page in front of him now, and he chose to write on it with his hands. He slid down, not loud, to stand near Malcolm, but not in his shadow. "Sheriff," he said, "you want witnesses or you want smoke? If you want witnesses, you listen to the landward party, and you don't run a match down a hole like a boy who's never seen a mine breathe." Malcolm considered the doctor the way you consider a lamp. You might move closer to your book or farther away. "Stand back," he said. "I will stand here," Dr. Vey said, very pleasantly, "so I may later write honestly of where I stood." Down below, Kindpoos raised 2 fingers to Eleanor and dropped them. Now, she pulled the second rope. The stones shifted. Air reversed for a blink. Smoke gusted at Malcolm's face. He coughed and blinked hot tears. When his vision cleared, he saw a figure rise in front of him, not 10 paces away. Not a man with a gun. A woman with bound wrists, chin lifted, eyes hard. Eleanor Hart walked into the space between him and the shelters and stood with her empty hands lowered so he could see them. Malcolm's mouth opened and then closed. He smiled. He had rehearsed something like this in private, and his words came smooth. "Eleanor," he said, "at last. Look what they've made you do. Come with me and we'll get you out of a hole that stinks of animals." Eleanor looked past him at Dr. Vey. She did not ask the doctor for mercy. She looked at his hands, because she could tell by the way he held them that he did not like seeing wrists bound. She looked back at Malcolm. "You put me in a hole," she said, "and you wrote a marriage that did not happen." She took the folded copy of Jonas's stolen lines from her pocket. "Your deposition speaks when you don't. It says, 'You will take me first, then write it true later.' You cannot write a life into being after the living have refused it." Malcolm's eyes flicked to the paper and then back to her face. He did not like paper in other people's hands. He liked paper lying on his desk, where he could smooth it with his palm. He moved his gun a fraction. "You are confused," he said. "You have been frightened. I forgive it. I will forgive their part too, if they give you up and walk out with their hands showing." Clara's laugh this time was not bitter. It was clear. "Come and fetch," she said. Kindpoos stepped out then, rifle held low, but steady. His eyes were on Malcolm's chest, not on the pistol. He stood with the exact balance of a man who has been in more than one world and learned to keep his feet in both. Malcolm's smile broke, and the thing behind it showed, the iron rod he had built inside himself, back when he had nothing, and swore he would never be nothing again. "There you are," he said softly, like a man spotting a wolf he means to skin. "Savage." A voice called from the rim. "Silas." "Malk." A gun hammered. The sound jumped around the bowl like a coin dropped in a church. Malcolm did not look up. He had wanted this moment for too long. Before the second shot, a thin shape slid along the rim and over and down as quick as a line of water. The shape was Jonas Pike's conscience, wearing Jonas Pike's face. He had followed, because a man who writes lines sometimes must see where those lines go. He had in his coat the rub Father Dunn had taken from the register, the faint names showing through like bones under skin. He carried also, pressed flat in his ledger, a page he had torn from Malcolm's desk when the sheriff had turned his back a full 2 heartbeats. He did not know why he had slipped that page between his own, only that the line with the blood smear had seemed to call out for company. He reached the shelf below the rim and crouched and whispered, "Eleanor," because he did not have sense enough to hold his tongue, and because he had never in his life been brave, the way men call brave, until this hour. Malcolm heard the undertaker's voice and smiled again, because Jonas was a man he knew how to move with his finger. "Bring the papers down, Pike," he said. "Bring them into the light where we can read them together." "No," Jonas said from the shadow, and the word came from some clean place he had kept for 30 years. He pushed the torn page out onto a flat stone. It slid and stuck near a crack where hot air breathed. The breath lifted the corner and made the paper twitch like a live thing. A brown smear along the margin showed in the flicker. Blood or tobacco, it didn't matter anymore. It looked like someone had touched it and tried to erase a part of himself and failed. Dr. Vey saw the smear and, with a surgeon's eye, knew it was blood long dried. He did not know whose. He understood it meant a line had been written, with more than ink. "Sheriff," he said quietly, "you will need to answer for that." He did not raise his voice. He put weight on the will, need the way a man sets a stone, where water will have to push around it. Malcolm stepped forward. He reached for the page because he could not bear that a piece of his power sat inches from his hand and refused him. Kindpoos's rifle lifted half an inch. Malcolm froze. He looked down and measured the barrel and the eyes above it. He had stared into barrels before. He had stared men into lowering them. This time the eyes did not move. They were not hate. They were not even anger. They were adore. Silas shouted again, this time in panic, because movement broke on the rim. 3 figures where there had been 2. A spark where there should have been none. The men with oil, bored and spooked, had lit a new line where the wind came different, and a tongue of flame leapt the gap and dropped inside the bowl on the far side, just where no one had set damp earth. Fire fell like a decision. The breath of the crock caught it and tried to love it, pulled it, then choked on the dirt and pushed it sideways, right toward the crack where the paper twitched. Eleanor moved without thinking. She dove and snatched the page away from the vent and shoved it into her bodice, where her heart thudded, which was the only safe in reach. Heat kissed her hands and took some skin as tribute. She kept the paper anyway. She rolled and came up on one knee and stared at Malcolm with the look of someone who has been burned and decided a burn is not the end of a story. Malcolm took a step, and Kindpoos lowered his rifle half an inch. It was a small mercy. It told Malcolm he could still leave alive, if he chose. He did not. He lifted his gun. Clara lifted a stone with both hands. Dr. Vey lifted nothing but his voice. "Stop," he said, and it cut clean across heat and smoke and all the small noises men make when their courage is about to run out. They stopped a half-breath. In that breath, on the rim behind Silas, Father Dunn appeared like a man who had walked out of his own skin. He held the parish register rubbing in one hand and a crucifix in the other, not as a charm, but as a weight. He shouted, not Latin now, but plain, "The record is false. You will not set fire to names." His voice shook the way a bell shakes the air. The men at the rim paused. The flame licked and then hesitated, as if uncertain whether it had been invited to this gathering or not. Below, the heat swelled. Smoke climbed and then flattened. Kindpoos felt the shift in his bones and knew the vent would cough a gout of heat in the next breath. He grabbed Eleanor's arm and yanked her back just as a burp of flame rolled where she had been kneeling. The old woman's song stopped as if someone had pinched a wick. Silence fell, huge, expectant, as if the land itself leaned forward to hear what would be said next and who would live to say it. Eleanor reached into her bodice with shaking fingers and pulled the sheriff's page back into the air, edges singed now, the smear darker. She held it up like a lantern. "This," she said, her voice hoarse and clear, "is the line he means to live by. It says he took me before he took me. It says a marriage exists inside his pocket. It says he will burn to make it so." She looked at the doctor, then at the priest, then at Jonas. "You 3 know what it means to write a thing true. Make this true. Make it speak." The wind shifted again. Heat pressed on their faces. Above, Silas cursed and took a step, and his boot nudged a lantern that tumbled, oil sloshing. It smashed and flared. The fire ran along a rope of dry grass, toward a second vent they had not seen. Caintpoos heard it coming, the way a man hears his own name in a crowd. He grabbed the first rope, shouted to Clara, and together they hauled the stone door across the new breath. The flame hit the closed throat and starved. Smoke punched at their chests, and then thinned. Malcolm Cray looked at the paper and saw his own power in someone else's hand, and something in him that had always been careful snapped. He drove forward. Caintpoos fired. The shot was a flat, short sound, and Malcolm staggered but did not fall. He fired back blind. Stone spat. Dr. Vowed ducked, and the bullet sang past his ear and lodged in the rock with a sound like a splinter popping out of a board. Jonas flinched and threw his ledger like a man throwing a brick. It struck Malcolm's wrist. The sheriff's pistol fell and clattered and slid toward the vent and stuck with the handle just at the edge of the world. For a heartbeat, every man held what he had: breath, rope, paper, memory. Then voices rose on the rim behind Father Dunn, many and close. The posse was not alone now. Others had come, drawn by the glow and the talk of coin, and the chance to say later they had stood where something happened. The bowl filled with new shadows. Eleanor looked up at the crowd and felt the old fear try to climb back up her spine. She set her heel on its fingers and ground down. She lifted the page higher. It fluttered like a small bird held by a stern hand. "Here, me," she said, and the land carried her voice up, because the land has never loved a lie. "This paper is marked with blood, not mine, not his, somebody else's. It is a promise to do a wrong and right it wholly. If you stand with it, you will become part of it. If you stand against it, then for once, the record will be true." The rim went quiet, except for the fidget of men who wanted to belong to something and suddenly could not tell what. Father Dunn's mouth opened, and he found he had more voice than he had thought. "I will witness," he said, and lifted the rubbing. "My page shows what was written in secret. It will not be erased." He looked at Dr. Vowed. The doctor lifted his chin. "I will witness," he said. He did not smile. Jonas Pike, breathing hard and empty-handed now, nodded. "I will write it in my book the way it happened." Malcolm Cray's face tightened. He had run his life on the power of being the only man with a pen in a room. He drew his body up. He did not look at Caintpoos or Eleanor or the old woman or Clara. He looked at the men above, the ones who still would rather follow a man who looked like them than a truth that did not. He opened his mouth to call them down and make a wall of bodies out of the narrow place where two worlds met. Before he could speak, the wind turned clean. It blew from the north in a single steady breath that made the flames gutter and pull along the rim in a new direction. Heat peeled off the bowl like old paint. The smoke thinned, and through it, from the cut to the north where boys and strong men had gone, there came a soft clicking sound, then many, like stones knocking in a river. Feet, more feet than 6 men could stop. Eyes, many, steady, patient. Clara reached for Eleanor's hand and squeezed once. Caintpoos's shoulders softened by a grain. The old woman's song began again, low, as if to greet someone arriving at last. Eleanor tucked the sheriff's page away again and squared herself to the slope. She could feel the next minutes rolling toward her like thunder. She could not see which stones would hold and which would roll. She only knew she would place her feet where the truest ground lay, the kind you feel in your chest when your eyes stop telling you lies. And if you think the blood smear on that page belonged to the man you expect, wait until you see who tried to wipe it off. The ledger's margin keeps the mark even now, and that mark points to the hand that set this fire to begin with. They came out of the north like a hush before rain, boots and soft moccasins, finding the old cuts without hurry. Young men with rifles held low. 2 boys not yet grown, faces set as if they had borrowed their father's bones for the night. 3 women with braided hair and belts hung with small tools for mending and binding, not for killing. They sank into the rim shadow, and the bowl became a place with more eyes than mouths. On the shelf below, Malcolm Cray weighed the new count and told himself numbers never mattered against a will like his. He lifted his chin and took one step to reclaim the center of the world. Kind Poos did not step back. He eased sideways, placing his body so the line from Malcolm's pistol to Eleanor ran through him first. It was a small motion, a man moving a shoulder as if to stretch. It changed everything. "Sheriff," Dr. Vey said, voice even, "you can end this with your mouth, not your hand." Malcolm smiled without teeth. "I always end things with both," he cited. Silas fired first, wild from the rim, the shot jerking like an insult to his own wrist. The bullet struck stone, spit shards, and one shard lanced Kind Poos under the collarbone. He grunted and took the weight of it without folding. Eleanor heard the sound a wounded tree makes when a storm pushes it and won't let it fall yet. Men above shouted and scattered. Two of Malcolm's coin followers bolted. The soldiers froze, caught between orders and the slow realization that this was not a raid, but a trap in which the law had trapped itself. Father Dunn raised the crucifix so high, his arm shook. "Enough," he said, and his voice hit a place between ribs that made some men stop where they were born, and some men run to the last thing they feared the most. Malcolm stepped, aiming for Eleanor's heart. Kind Poos moved, and the barrel kissed his chest at 5 paces. He leaned into it and said, not loud, "No." He said it like a door closing. Malcolm fired. The sound was short and hot. Kind Poos took the bullet as if catching a thrown stone. He moved back 1 step, then another, and found the wall with his shoulder. His eyes did not leave Malcolm's. He did not look down at the wound. He did not look at Eleanor. He kept the sheriff in his gaze as a hawk keeps a mouse. It was not hate. It was a promise kept. "Enough," he said again, and slid down the rock until one knee touched dust. Eleanor's hands went to him and came back bloody. She looked at Dr. Vey. The doctor was already moving, dropping to his knees, pressing a wad of rag into the wound, his face set to a focus that had nothing to do with paper and everything to do with the small battle of a man trying to keep red inside another man's chest. "Hold," he said, and Kind Poos obeyed, because the word sounded like the one elders used when they needed the world to listen. Malcolm raised the pistol again, and this time Eleanor lifted Tom's old rusted gun. It had slept useless at her belt because she had not believed her hand could talk that language. Now her hand knew. She sighted the way Kind Poos had shown her to sight, with her feet. Feel the ground. Make a line from heel to heart. She squeezed. The pistol kicked like a mule. Malcolm jerked and staggered sideways, a dark bloom spreading low under his ribs. He did not fall. He was too stubborn to believe ground had a right to him. Silas screamed at the wrong thing and emptied his revolver into the bowl, hitting stone, fire, air. One wild shot tore down toward the shelters. Clara threw herself across the splinted woman and felt the bullet split dust by her ear. She laughed once, high and bright, because fear had turned into something sharper and easier to carry. Above, the two soldiers looked at each other. One lifted his rifle into the air and discharged it straight up, the report like a judge's gavel. "Cease," he said. It wasn't an order. It was a choice placed in a room. Men chose. Some lowered their guns, sucking air as if they had been underwater too long. One of the coin men ran away so fast his hat stayed where it was. The rest held still because the land had decided to hold them. Malcolm drew a second time, because that was his nature. He aimed not at Eleanor now, but at the paper she had tucked near her heart. He meant to put a hole where the words were, and then say, "The hole proved the words were false." A hand came out of the smoke and clamped his wrist. Jonas Pike. The undertaker's palm shook, but his grip was the kind made strong by 30 years of lifting the dead. "No more," Jonas said. His voice surprised even him. "I will not dig this grave for you." Malcolm wrenched free and hit Jonas with the back of the gun. The blow cut Jonas above the brow. Blood ran into his eye. He did not step back. He shoved Malcolm, not hard, just enough to tilt a man who was already standing on a lie. Malcolm's heel found the lip of the same small hole as before. This time, his strength did not save him. He tottered and would have fallen into the vent if Kindpus had not caught his coat with his left hand. The old woman's song faltered. All the air in the bowl hesitated. Kindpus held Malcolm above the vent an inch, two, then eased him to his feet. He had no reason to save the man. He did it anyway, because the land does not pick and choose its breath. He let go. Go, he said, and blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. Malcolm blinked, shocked by the gift. He lifted his pistol to answer it with lead. A crack split the air. Not a gun, a baton breaking. Father Dunn had torn the cross from its wall at the parish in his rage, and now tore rage from himself. He lifted the rubbing and shouted, "This is the truth." He thrust the paper toward the rim, where men who had loved lies could see their own faces in the faint graphite of Eleanor's name. And this, he pulled a penknife from his sleeve, slit his own finger, and drew a line across the ghostly lawful. Blood beaded and ran. This is how falsehood is struck. He wrapped the bleeding finger in his sleeve. He knew the stain would mark his cassock forever. He wanted that mark. He wanted the young to point and ask, and the old to nod and say, yes. That was the day. Something in Malcolm's face broke, not the iron rod, but the fine porcelain it had been cast in. He looked small for one breath, a boy who had learned too young that taking was the only way to survive. Then he looked old, like a man who had used that lesson too long and found there was nothing left to take that did not turn to ash in his mouth. He took a step toward Eleanor anyway, because habits last longer than flesh. Silas tried to swing his pistol to cover them and found it empty. He fumbled for a cartridge and sliced his thumb on the raw edge of a lantern shard stuck in his belt for lack of a pouch. He sucked the blood and spat. His hand shook. He wiped it across his coat and down the inside of his wrist, then reached for the scrap of paper still caught near the vent, as if tearing it would tear the world back to the shape he knew. He rubbed at the brown smear with his bleeding thumb in a frantic circle and looked up, and in that look, Father Dunn saw the truth that would later anchor a line in a file. The smear on Malcolm's deposition hadn't been tobacco. It had been Silas's blood, the night he scraped the chain line clean and tried to wipe the telltale off the page. The priest said nothing then. He stored this in the pocket, where a man keeps a nail for a coffin. He knows he must build right. Malcolm lunged. Kindpus moved to take him, and his knees kissed dust. He had given too much blood to stand between anyone and anything now. Eleanor stepped into the gap, the rusted pistol steady. "No," she said. The word was the same word Kindpus had used. It belonged to her now. Malcolm looked at her and saw he was at the end of a page. He swung at the book. They shot almost together. Her bullet hit him low again, tearing what had already torn. His went high and wild, burning a notch in the rock. He grabbed for her wrist and failed. He staggered once, turned as if looking for a chair that wasn't there, and sat down hard with his back against the wall. He slid sideways, head bowed like a man in prayer who had forgotten the words. Silas stared, mouth slack. He made a sound that might have been his brother's name, and then saw the eyes on him, the soldiers, the boys, the old woman's, Clara's, God's. He broke. He ran along the rim, stumbled, and kept running. He went the way men go who can't tell if they flee punishment or mercy. He would not get far. Men like him never do. The things they have written with their hands run faster. Dr. Vey pressed both palms to Kindpus's chest, felt the slow hammer falter. "Stay," he said. He knew it for a command too large, but he gave it anyway. Kindpus reached and found Eleanor's wrist and put her hand over the doctor's. "Enough," he said the third time, and in his language it meant, "You have done what your name asked of you." He turned his head to the old woman. She leaned in so close her gray braid brushed his cheek. She spoke into his ear like a secret, and he smiled a little. Boy young for a blink. Then his breath slipped its knot. It went out like a tide that never returned. No one moved. Even the fire above went quiet, a ring of sullen red waiting for instruction. It did not get it. The north wind kept on, indifferent to men. The smoke thinned and rose and became sky again. Eleanor closed Kindpus's eyes with 2 fingers and felt the heat of his skin leaving. She did not cry yet. She was not finished. She stood, the paper in her bodice pressed against her sternum like a small shield. She turned to Malcolm. He sat with his head fallen forward and his breath wheezing. He raised his eyes and tried to smile, the way a snake tries to shed skin. "You'll be a story," he said, meaning it to be a curse. "You'll be a story 100 men tell wrong." Eleanor shook her head. "I'll be a name you can't erase." She looked up. "Jonas," she said. "Right." Jonas Pike, who had thrown his ledger like a weapon, picked it up again. He wiped blood from his eye with the heel of his hand and opened to a clean page. His pen shook, but it made a mark. He wrote the date. He wrote Eleanor Hart Lives. He wrote Kindpoos, who broke the chain, died shielding her. He wrote Malcolm Cray, sheriff, shot and bled. He paused. He touched the page where a cause of death line should be for a woman who was not dead. He left it blank. He left it blank on purpose. Later he would add her name to the back of the book, where he kept the ones who walked out of his house and into someone else's keeping. He would never fill a cause beside her name. He could not. She was not for him to close. Father Dunn climbed down with care. A man of his years should not show so well. He knelt by Malcolm and said only, "Repent." Malcolm laughed in a small rattle that made no shape. The priest turned away. He went to Eleanor. "Child," he said, and the word did not mean small. He held out the rubbing, the faint names, the bloodline. "What do I do with this?" Eleanor took it and folded it slow. "You keep it," she said. "You keep it until a man comes to your door and says the law needs an honest page. Then you give him one." She looked at Dr. Vey. "Will the army ask?" Dr. Vey wiped his hands on a clean strip and tied it, then tied another, as if binding the wound of the hour. He met her eyes. "I will ask," he said, "and I will answer. In writing, in court if there is one, not built out of the sheriff's furniture. I will seal what should be sealed. I will leave open what needs to breathe." The old woman stood. She put her palm on Eleanor's cheek, left a faint print of ash. She spoke a name that was not English, and then added, in words Eleanor knew, "Stone Daughter." It sounded like a blessing and a burden that would last. They lifted Kindpoos with a care reserved for chiefs and mothers. They carried him into the cool place under the wall, where the earth took him back like water, taking a hand. They set stones, not high, not tight, just enough to tell those who knew how to look that a great weight lay there and should not be stepped on. The old woman sang, and the song fit under the stones. Like water fits a bowl. Men on the rim drifted away, taking their fear with them like smoke in their clothes. The soldiers stood a long while. One saluted no one, a private gesture for his own sense of what had just been done and what had not. Dr. Vey climbed after them and told them what they had seen in simple words. He made them repeat it until the shape of the truth set in their mouths. He did not trust memory. He trusted drills. Father Dunn walked back to the parish in the thin light before dawn. He unlocked the door with a hand that would not stop trembling and laid the rubbing beside the register. The faint names stared. He opened the register to the page with the groove of Eleanor's name under the scraped fibers. He dipped his pen. He did not write a marriage. He wrote a note in his own small hand across the margin. The entry attempted here was never made before God or man. He let the ink dry. He pricked his finger again, drew a narrow X across the curve of lawful that still lingered as a wound in the paper. He did not do it because blood has magic. He did it because this book had been baptized too many times in lies, and he meant to mark the day it remembered the sacrament of truth. Jonas Pike washed his face in a dipper behind his shop and saw red in the water and could not tell whose it was. He sat at his table and copied the lines he had written from his ledger into a second book he had kept since his apprentice days. He called it his conscience. He wrote with the same neat hand. He left Eleanor's cause blank again and again until his hand knew how not to fill that line without thinking. He slipped Malcolm's torn page into an oilskin and hid it under a floorboard. He would give it to the right man when the right man asked, and not before. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep sitting up. He dreamed of a chain falling and striking wood with a hollow note, and the note becoming a bell, and the bell calling people to a church where the door stood open to the night. Clara sat with the old women and learned how to bind a leg so it holds when fear would shake it. She carried water and said thank you to the creek aloud, the way her mother had said it with her eyes. When she slept, she dreamed of a porch, her cheek pressed to the plank, splinters speaking into her skin. In the dream she rose and walked out into the road, and when men shouted her name, she did not stop. In the morning she woke and washed her face, and laughed once to herself, and went to find Eleanor, because there was walking to be done. Eleanor returned to Tool Lake at last, not because she had to, but because a small part of her still lay there. The sound of a chain striking wood, the taste of dust, the spot where she had promised herself she would not be erased. She walked with Clara in the thin hour when birds speak before they trust light. On the shore she found the broken link a boy had missed when he combed for metal. It lay half buried in mud. She lifted it, felt its weight, and understood why men had learned to love such tools too much. She carried it to the wagon where the iron ring hung torn from the bed. She set the link upon the ring and left both there, plain as a marker. She did not need to cross herself. The act was its own prayer. Dr. Vey came there later with 2 soldiers and a notebook. He found the same ring and the same link and wrote in his calm hand, "Only chains found." He hated the sentence. He knew what it would do. It would live in a file and crowd out the rest, because a tidy lie always pushes an untidy truth to the margin. He sealed the coroner's packet when Malcolm's body came in, not because he loved secrets, but because secrets in the open become trophies in towns like this. He wrote another line in the diary he did not have to share. The widow is not missing. She is gone where your road does not run. Silas Cray was found 2 days later in a ditch with his thumb wrapped in a filthy rag. Some said he rode into the dark and his horse threw him. Some said he tried to swim the slough drunk and the slough took him like a debt. Father Dunn said over the body, "Blood bears witness," and a soldier standing near noticed the bandage over the deputy's left thumb and remembered the smear in the deposition's margin, the curve of a left thumb rubbed in a hurry. He did not say it aloud. He did not have to. There are truths that stand without sound. Sheriff Malcolm Cray was buried without parade. Jonas marked the stone with nothing more than a name and a date because anything else felt like using words to do the wrong kind of work. Men came by and read it, and spat, or crossed themselves, or said nothing. A boy traced the letters with a dirty finger and asked his father what sheriff meant. The father looked at the sky and said, "A man who thought paper could carry a soul." The Modoc gathered on a ridge as the sun dropped and told the story the way their elders taught them. A chain broke because a man's hand remembered stone. A woman stood where fire wanted to run and told it to breathe wrong. A priest put blood on a page not to bind, but to unbind. A doctor held a life with both hands and learned which ones to let go. An undertaker refused to write a lie. A girl laughed at fear and made it smaller. They said Kindpoose's name and touched the stone and set small food there because the dead sometimes walk far and hunger on the way. Eleanor did not become a saint in anyone's book. She did not want to be. She stayed where the black rock met the thin grass until the seasons widened the space between her and the sound of chains inside her head. She went south when the weather turned and helped an old woman who was not the same old woman build a wall where wind could not lift the ashes. She learned to see water where it hides. She learned to step so the earth did not notice her coming until she had left something living behind. Bread, a word, a name spoken true. Years later, in a county room where dust lived on shelves like patient cats, a clerk found a packet with a broken seal and a note in a surgeon's hand and a smudge of old blood. He turned the papers and frowned at the blank cause in an undertaker's column and the priest's red X. He closed the packet and set it back and told himself order had been served because all the papers lay together now. He did not know that order had been served that night around a vent when breath chose a path and men chose to match it. If you hold Jonas Pike's ledger in your hands, on the page where he wrote her name, you'll feel a small ridge where the pen pressed harder and then lifted, as if his heart remembered it had no right to finish that line. If you stand in Father Dunn's chapel and let your fingers find the faint groove under the erased lawful, your skin will carry away a whisper of iron and wax, and a sweetness like old flowers. And at Tool Lake, when the wind comes thin and mean off the beds, something still taps now and then against the wood of that busted wagon, link on ring, ring on link, like a small bell, keeping time for anyone tempted to forget. If the ledger speaks again, you'll know which page to open first.